UN ambassador expressed Moscow's anger over the coordinated strikes on Syria's chemical weapons storage and research facilities.
We demand the immediate stop to aggression and refrain from the illegal use of force in the future.
On Saturday, a team of inspectors from the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons arrived in Damascus to investigate the site in nearby Douma. Nebenzia criticized the three powers for carrying out the strikes before the team could complete its work and draw conclusions.
This is how you want international affairs to be conducted now? This is hooliganism in international affairs, and not minor hooliganism, as we are talking about major nuclear powers.
The three powers were unapologetic, saying the strikes were justified, legitimate, and proportionate.
Last night, we successfully hit the heart of Syria's chemical weapons enterprise. And because of these actions, we are confident we have crippled Syria's chemical weapons program. We are prepared to sustain this pressure if the Syrian regime is foolish enough to test our will.
Russia also argued that the strikes contradicted international law and the UN Charter. France's ambassador disagreed.
I would remind them that that charter was not designed in order to protect criminals.
Britain's envoy said the action was limited and avoided civilian casualties.
The United Kingdom believes that it was both right and legal to take military action, together with our closest allies, to alleviate further humanitarian suffering by degrading the Syrian regime's chemical weapons capability and deterring the use of chemical weapons.
Russian efforts to get the Council to condemn the strikes in a resolution overwhelmingly failed, earning only 3 of 15 votes in favor. Margaret Bashir, VOA News, the United Nations.
Thank you, sir. Russia called for this urgent meeting of the Security Council to discuss the aggressive actions of the United States and their allies against Syria. This is the 5th meeting on this topic just this week. The President of the Russian Federation, Putin, made a special statement today, and I will quote him. On the 14th of April, the United States, supported by its ally, launched an airstrike against military and civilian targets of the Syrian Arab Republic without a mandate from the United Nations Security Council and in violations of UN Charter and norms and principles of international law. An aggression against a sovereign state was carried out, which is on the front line in the fight against terrorism. Just as 1 year ago, when the Syria air base in Syria came under attack, the United States used as a pretext a staged chemical attack against civilians. This time in Douma, Damascus suburb. Now, Russian military experts did not find any traces of chlorine or any other toxic agents when they visited the site. Not a single local resident was able to confirm that a chemical attack had actually taken place. The Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons dispatched its experts to Syria in order to investigate all the circumstances. However, in a sign of cynical disdain, a group of Western countries decided to take military action without waiting for the results of the investigation. Russia condemns in the strongest possible terms the attack against Syria, where Russian military personnel are assisting the legitimate government in its counterterrorism efforts. Through its actions, the United States makes an already catastrophic humanitarian situation in Syria even worse and brings suffering to civilians. In fact, the U.S. panders to the terrorists who have been tormenting the Syrian people for 7 years, leading to a wave of refugees fleeing this country and the region. The current escalation around Syria is destructive for the entire system of international relations. History will deliver its verdict, and Washington already bears a heavy responsibility for the bloody outrage in Yugoslavia, Iraq, and Libya. End of quote. Russia has done everything possible to convince the United States and its allies to refrain from their military plans, which could lead to a new spiral of violence in Syria and destabilize the Middle East. The Secretary General of the UN at the meeting of the Security Council that we convened yesterday and today, has expressed his concern about the way events have developed. However, in Washington, London, and Paris, preferred to disregard calls to appeals to common sense. The United States and its allies continue to demonstrate blatant disregard for international law. Although as permanent members of the Security Council, they must be especially firm in protecting the provisions of the UN Charter. It was shameful to hear how, in justifying the aggression, an article of the U.S. Constitution was mentioned. Now we have the greatest respect to the right of each state to respect their own founding law. However, Washington should learn, it's time for Washington to learn that the International Code of Behavior regarding the use of force is regulated by the United Nations Charter. It's interesting how the people of Great Britain and France, what they will think that when they find out that their government is taking part in an illegal military adventure by referring to the American Constitution. You're constantly tempted by neocolonialism. You have nothing but disdain for the UN Charter and the Security Council, which you are unjustifiably trying to use for your illicit aims. There's no serious work that you're doing in the Security Council. You don't consult us, and you mendaciously claim otherwise. You undermine the authority of the Security Council. As a pretext for aggression, you mention the alleged use of chemical weapons in the Syrian city of Douma. Representatives of Russia, after an inspection by our experts, unequivocally stated that no such incident took place. Furthermore, there were people found who took part in this staging. And in fact, the inspirers and organizers of that staging were foreign intelligence services. After this event, the Syrian authorities immediately invited experts from the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons so that they conduct a field mission to Douma in order to establish the facts. Quickly, visa formalities were resolved and guarantees of security were provided. At the time the strikes were conducted, experts were already in Syria and getting ready to begin their work. I want to recall to the members of the Security Council and everyone else that on the 10th of April, when our draft resolution on the secure work of the special mission of the OPCW was blocked, we were assured of the fact that such a document was not necessary. We were told that the mission, without any additional efforts by the Security Council, will go visit the site and conduct an investigation of the chemical incident. Now it is clear that we were absolutely right. Yesterday, some of our colleagues, some of them naively, some of them cynically, told us that the reason of the situation is supposedly a lack of an independent investigative mechanism. The aggression has shown that that is not the issue at all, as we stated. During last year's attack against the Syria air base, there was the joint investigative mechanism of the UN OPCW that did not prevent the United States from conducting a missile strike. Afterwards, the JIM, in fact, made sure that its conclusions coincided with the reasons for the American strike. We have said many times, you don't need any investigations. You didn't need them then, and you don't need them today. The organizers of the aggression didn't even wait for the elementary establishment of facts by an international organization which is authorized to do that. They supposedly determine everything for themselves and determine who was guilty. After, given that they themselves, with the fighters that were under their control and NGOs that they control, they disseminated all kinds of rumors using social media. They confirmed this through so-called secret intelligence. Mythical secret intelligence. Ladies and gentlemen, the masks, or rather white helmets, have once again fallen. We are already used to the fact that when they conduct their doubtful geopolitical policies, the countries that are aggressors already blame the regime of Assad. Lately, they tend to shift responsibility on Russia, which, according to their interpretation, cannot control the dictator. All this is based on a scheme that has been well tried. There's a provocation, there's mendacious accusations, a verdict, and punishment. This is how you want international affairs to be conducted now? This is hooliganism in international relations and not minor hooliganism, given that we're talking about major nuclear powers. Several strikes were conducted against the Scientific Research Center in Barza and Jamraya. Recently, 2 inspections by the OPCW were conducted with unimpeded access to all facilities. Experts didn't find any traces of activity that would contravene the Chemical Weapons Convention. The scientific facilities in Syria are used only for peaceful activity, which is aimed at enhancing the effectiveness of economic activity of Syria. You want Syria to have no economy at all? You want to throw this country back into the Stone Age? Just a few years ago, this country was one of the most developed countries in the Middle East. You want to finish off what your sanctions haven't achieved yet. At the same time, you are shedding crocodile tears about the suffering of ordinary Syrians. Well, ordinary Syrians who are tired of war and who are happy that their legitimate authorities have freed their territory are not. You're not interested in their suffering. Your aggressive actions contribute to worsening the humanitarian situation, which you are so worried about, according to your statements. In 24 hours, you could stop the conflict in Syria. For this, Washington, London, and Paris only have to give orders to their hand-picked terrorists to stop their fighting against the legitimate authorities and against their own people. Strikes were conducted against Syrian military airfields, which are being used in the course of an operation against terrorist organizations. It's quite an original contribution to the combat against international terrorism, as Washington keeps repeating, which, as Washington keeps repeating, is the only goal of its military presence in Syria. We have serious doubts about that. It seems that it is clear that those in the West who cover themselves with humanitarian rhetoric are trying to justify their action in Syria by supposedly to defeat the jihadists, are actually aiming at dismembering the country. This is confirmed by the fact that the United States has refused to take part in rebuilding the areas of Syria that have been freed from the jihadists. Lastly, your aggression is a major strike and threat against the possibility of continuing the political process under the UN auspices, which, in spite of objective difficulties, was moving forward at varying speeds. So, what were your constant references to the Geneva process worth if you yourselves, using your own actions, are destroying that process? We call on the United States and its allies to immediately end the aggressive actions against Syria and to refrain from them in the future. We are putting forward for your attention a brief draft resolution which we will demand a vote on at the end of this meeting. We would like to address the members of the Security Council. Today is not the time to shirk your responsibilities. The whole world is looking at you. Take a principled stand. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Mr. Secretary General, for your briefing today. This is our 5th Security Council meeting in the past week to address the situation in Syria. A week has gone by in which we have talked. We've talked about the victims in Douma. We've talked about the Assad regime and its patrons, Russia and Iran. We've spent a week talking about the unique horror of chemical weapons. The time for talk ended last night. We're here today because 3 permanent members of the United Nations Security Council acted. The United Kingdom, France, and the United States acted, not as revenge, not as punishment, not as a symbolic show of force. We acted to deter the future use of chemical weapons by holding the Syrian regime responsible for its atrocities against humanity. We can all see that a Russian disinformation campaign is in full force this morning. But Russia's desperate attempts at deflection cannot change the facts. A large body of information indicates that the Syrian regime used chemical weapons in Douma on April 7th. There is clear information demonstrating Assad's culpability. The pictures of dead children were not fake news. They were the result of the Syrian regime's barbaric inhumanity. And they were the result of the regime and Russia's failure to live up to their international commitments to remove all chemical weapons from Syria. The United States, France, and the United Kingdom acted after careful evaluation of these facts. The targets we selected were at the heart of the Syrian regime's illegal chemical weapons program. The strikes were carefully planned to minimize civilian casualties. The responses were justified, legitimate, and proportionate. The United States and its allies did everything we could to use the tools of diplomacy to get rid of Assad's arsenal of chemical weapons. We did not give diplomacy just one chance. We gave diplomacy chance after chance. 6 times. That's how many times Russia vetoed Security Council resolutions to address chemical weapons in Syria. Our efforts go back even further. In 2013, the Security Council passed a resolution that required the Assad regime to destroy its stockpile of chemical weapons. Syria committed to abide by the Chemical Weapons Convention, meaning it could no longer have chemical weapons on its soil. President Putin said Russia would guarantee that Syria complied. We hoped that this diplomacy would succeed in putting an end to the horror of chemical attacks in Syria. But as we see from the past year, that did not happen. While Russia was busy protecting the regime, Assad took notice. The regime knew it could act with impunity, and it did. In November, Russia used its veto to kill the Joint Investigative Mechanism, the main tool we had to figure out who used chemical weapons in Syria. Just as Russia was using its veto, the Assad regime used sarin, leading to dozens of injuries and deaths. Russia's veto was the green light for the Assad regime to use these most barbaric weapons against the Syrian people, in complete violation of international law. The United States and our allies were not going to let that stand. Chemical weapons are a threat to us all. They are a unique threat, a type of weapon so evil that the international community agreed they must be banned. We cannot stand by and let Russia trash every international norm that we stand for and allow the use of chemical weapons to go unanswered. And just as the Syrian regime's use of chemical weapons last weekend was not an isolated incident, our response is part of a new course chartered last year to deter future use of chemical weapons. Our Syrian strategy has not changed. However, the Syrian regime has forced us to take action based on their repeated use of chemical weapons. Since the April 2017 chemical attack at Khan Sheikhoun, the United States has imposed hundreds of sanctions on individuals and entities involved in chemical weapons use in Syria and North Korea. We have designated entities in Asia, the Middle East, and Africa that have facilitated chemical weapons proliferation. We have revoked the visas of Russian intelligence officers in response to the chemical attack in Salisbury. We will continue to seek out and call out anyone who uses and anyone who aids in the use of chemical weapons. With yesterday's military action, our message was crystal clear. The United States of America will not allow the Assad regime to continue to use chemical weapons. Last night, we obliterated the major research facility that it used to assemble weapons of mass murder. I spoke to the president this morning, and he said if the Syrian regime uses this poisonous gas again, the United States is locked and loaded. When our president draws a red line, our president enforces the red line. The United States is deeply grateful to the United Kingdom and France for its part in the coalition to defend the prohibition of chemical weapons. We worked in lockstep. We were in complete agreement. Last night, our great friends and indispensable allies shouldered a burden that benefits all of us. The civilized world owes them its thanks. In the weeks and months to come, the Security Council should take time to reflect on its role in defending the international rule of law. The Security Council has failed in its duty to hold those who use chemical weapons to account. That failure is largely due to Russian obstruction. We call on Russia to take a hard look at the company it keeps and live up to its responsibilities as a permanent member of the Council and defend the actual principles the United Nations was meant to promote. Last night, we successfully hit the heart of Syria's chemical weapons enterprise. And because of these actions, we are confident we have crippled Syria's chemical weapons program. We are prepared to sustain this pressure if the Syrian regime is foolish enough to test our will. Thank you.